Hey everybody, welcome back to our usual weekly podcast, this time on the correct day. It's Friday. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChainArgos. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your likes, comments, and of course your subscriptions. Keep them coming. We appreciate it very much. With me as usual every week, Jonathan Reiter, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist. This week we're going to talk to you a little bit about three things basically. We're going to look at the Consensys MetaMask sort of you give me a Wells notice, I'll sue you first thing that's going on. I mean, that's what they've decided to do. We'll look at the Samourai wallet as well. Samourai has an interesting spelling. I noticed that.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about.
But anyway, it's like Samourai. Samourai. Okay.
It's the Commonwealth spelling. Yeah.
Maybe. There's a lot of unnecessary letters in it. Finally, we'll look at Renzo Restaked ETH, otherwise known as Easy ETH. So let's take a look at that. We got some charts for you as usual. But John, tell me a little bit about this Consensys MetaMask kerfuffle.
Well, so it seems like Consensys received a Wells notice. It's about a week and a half ago now.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And I don't believe they've actually released the entire contents, but they've released the fact that, or they claim, I guess they haven't released it, that they're the SEC intends to go after them for operating.
That's right. It's a bit like the Uniswap one, where they the Uniswap in Uniswap's case they totally didn't.
They
share
didn't
any
give
information
about
the Wells notice. So this one they kind of teased a little bit of information, but not a whole lot.
If the notice has been made public, somebody sent it to us.
Yeah, because we don't
look that hard, but I didn't see it.
I hadn't seen it.
So the claim here, supposedly, again, I guess I'll say allegedly, is that MetaMask is a broker under current rules, new rules, whatever, securities broker, and there are various things they have registered for. That does seem wrong to me. So I question whether that's what's being alleged precisely, or if it's something slightly different. And if that is in fact what's being alleged, then that doesn't really seem to make any sense. So MetaMask is a piece of software, just a piece of software, and it is open source. You can build the MetaMask add-in yourself, right? So we know that this thing does not have access to your keys. Mm-hmm. If it was closed source, like many other wallets out there are, you don't really know that it's not copying your keys. It promises not to, but who knows? In which case, it could have control over anything. This piece of software does not do that. Maybe you download a malicious version that does. That's not MetaMask's responsibility. So it allows you to interact with various trading protocols, but it's just a piece of software that does that. This isn't financial anything. This is like regulating a web browser because you can use a bank website. Sometimes people in crypto say that about products where the product could steal your money. MetaMask, as distributed in practice in the wild, does not have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
You could modify it to, and you could give people malicious versions of it, but that is not how MetaMask works. So this isn't a situation where their claims of we have no access to your funds are lies. It's the truth here, and it doesn't seem like this should be regulated as much of anything. So there you go.
Maybe for
we have to be clear. This is based on
the code?
Consensys' characterization of the complaints. There may be other complaints
that we don't know about.
There are other things MetaMask does that they may or may not have a problem with.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they're alleging that various intermediation services MetaMask interfaces with are themselves exchanges. There's a lot of pieces here. So,
okay, so for the uninitiated, could you maybe, in a nutshell, explain to us what MetaMask exactly does? Because a lot of people seem to think that it's a wallet akin to like an online version of Trezor or something like that. I've seen those comparisons being made. So clearly there is some confusion. Yeah,
okay, so the way decentralized exchange or blockchain trading, crypto stuff works is there's some computer address endpoint out there in the ether or whatever in the cloud that you can make function calls to, and it'll give you responses. In some cases, it'll send you back assets that let you control more money, send you to different places, whatever it is. So the way those function calls work is you pass it you basically your address and proof that you own the address, a digital signature, something like that. And it'll verify your signature, and it needs your signature to be able to convey assets, whatever, within that blockchain ecosystem. MetaMask automates the process of generating those signatures and interpreting the messages back and forth. That really is all it does. So it doesn't have the ability to influence where anything goes. Now, if you contrast this with a closed source piece of software, you enter your password, you have no idea if it keeps your password or not. You know MetaMask doesn't because you can see, right? Whenever somebody says that their wallet, the Coinbase wallet is a classic example here, where they say it's built on an open source SDK. This means that you don't know what Coinbase wallet is doing. You know what MetaMask is doing. So MetaMask intermediates transactions between stuff on your computer and stuff that's out there on some blockchain in some cloud data center. Yeah, it takes data and massages it into the format that's necessary for the blockchain computer thing on the other end to handle it. That's basic cryptography, and it's the type of thing that, I have interacted with many of these networks without using MetaMask. You can write the code yourself if you know what you're doing. It's not particularly complicated, but that is absolutely not a retail, generic, mass market end user experience. They need buttons to press on a screen. All this thing does is wrap those operations. For those of you who have a limited familiarity with cryptography, if you use the example of prime numbers, multiplication, and factoring for the way public key stuff works, that's not exactly how any modern crypto systems work, but whatever. Imagine that all MetaMask is doing is multiplying your private prime number by somebody else's public prime number and sending the product somewhere. So it's something conceptually like that. Similarly, it could just be applying a hash function to a blob of data. Right? It's those sorts of operations that are not in and of themselves meaningful at all. I don't see why anybody would assert that that's a broker. If that really is the claim, I think we both think that's completely crazy.
Yeah, because simplistically, it's, ignore all the blockchain funkiness. It's like a web browser. Right?
Yeah, that really is like a web browser.
Because most of you probably won't remember this, but before there were web browsers, you'd have to type in like an IP address and stuff like that, like the numbers, and this is a long time ago.
You were using dodgy websites. That's what that is.
So, web browser basically, helps you to get to the thing, just text and stuff like that. I guess that would be...
Give it a better analogy. So instead of using a generic web browser that uses all kinds of things, if your bank gave you a web browser that only worked for your bank, that would clearly be a piece of banking software.
Yeah.
Right? You entered your bank password in that, and it came from your bank, and you had no idea what it did. As opposed to, you get a whole bunch of web browsers, whatever you want, it's fine. Similarly, if you get a wallet from a number of providers where the source is not public and the operations are not really public, you can just observe what it's doing, inputs and outputs, but you can't tell what it's saving on the inside. Yeah, that's different. That's a situation where they may well be making decisions. Here, they're not doing that. Now, there are a number of services that have been, smart contracts that have been published that are MetaMask affiliated. Some of this stuff is labeled MetaMask in our system for the users. So maybe they're alleging that some of that stuff constitutes securities unregistered exchange, that kind of activity. We need to see what exactly they're claiming. There are pieces of things adjacent to MetaMask that I agree may be problems. So, we haven't read every single contract that's out there. So
Okay, next thing. Samourai wallet.
So these guys were arrested yesterday?
Maybe 2 days ago.
Either Wednesday or Thursday U.S. time. We're different time zone. So this is a long-time privacy mixer wallet service. Mm-hmm. This thing's been around since either 15 or 16. And it's an interesting service in that these people have never really claimed that the whole thing is... They say non-custodial in a couple places, but they also say that they run their own servers, which is an interesting contrast. In fact, I had not read their code until yesterday. There are, comments, tooltips in the system explaining that the default behavior is to rely on their servers. So they are accused of two types of things. Conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to operate an unregistered money transmitter, unlicensed money transmitter. So we'll take those kind of in turn, such as it is. So we're going to put aside we'll start with the money laundering bit, right? So
guilty.
So conspiracy law in the U.S. What is go through basics of conspiracy law in the U.S., right?
So basically, let's say now, for instance, you've assembled a whole bunch of weapons and ammunition, and you've posted like a whole bunch of messages on a blog or a Facebook page that says that you intend to go shoot up something, that's sufficient to get you.
No, but what are the essential elements here?
Oh, okay. Intent, approval, that you can prove that intent, and action towards the furtherance of that intent. That should be enough.
Okay, so somebody's got to agree something, and somebody's got to take some kind of action.
Yeah, you can't just post a blog post to say that I'm gonna go shoot up like a Home Depot or something like that.
That's one person. It's a group of people, whatever. But
yeah, but it's not enough. Oh, and conspiracy, you require more than one person. Yeah. You can't just do it alone as well.
So, but they have to have done something.
You need to do something in the furtherance of the conspiracy.
Because they've acknowledged all over the place, and I mean the government seized their servers, so like they clearly deployed software on servers. It seems like certainly that a conspiracy is chargeable over something, I think, is unquestionable, because there was agreement, discussion, and overt acts. Whether or not their chats constitute, sufficient proof under the money laundering statutes that they did money laundering. But yeah, I mean that's a proper technical legal question. But these guys definitely took actions in furtherance of. This is definitely not a situation in which they got in trouble for only writing code, and we know that in part because the government seized their servers.
Guilty.
So like that, this is for sure. They were running a system. They documented that they were running a system. As far as I can tell, again, I'm not an expert in their code, but I have read it, which I think puts me in a super minority of people. It's not actually that long or complicated. It's pretty old style, boring Java. The way the system was set up, a lot of their servers were the default choice for people who didn't know how to run their own back-end servers, to run their own mixing servers, that kind of thing. My guess is that the vast majority of users of the system don't understand what I just said and use the default settings, which relied on their servers. In fact, I saw some public comments to the effect that the service was now down because their servers weren't running. Possible their servers were necessary for all configurations of the system, but as far as I can tell, you can still use the system without their servers. It's just that most of the money laundering that went on relied on their servers.
So on the charge of conspiracy to commit money laundering, how do you find?
I mean, that one seems like a real struggle, particularly because there appear to be lots of chats in which they talk about how they expect criminals to use their service. So, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for your service.
Yeah. I mean, you can have an argument about just writing software, and maybe the deployment of software on a blockchain maybe or maybe isn't, an action beyond publishing software. Publishing software on GitHub, nobody has a problem with, or on a web page. Deploying it on a blockchain is deploying it in some sense. Setting up your system in such a way that users can configure the way they use it, and making the default a reliance on computers you run in a data center and pay for, that is absolutely not, under any meaning of any of these words, just publishing software, right? Even Bill Clinton couldn't get out of that one, right? What the meaning of the word running is, or deploying is, or is. So these guys were 100% running a system. The system itself, the code they published documents that they were not.
I saw that.
Now, the second component here is whether or not they were doing money transmission. And that one is a little bit more confusing. Yeah. The way the system was designed, they were not able to actually take your money at any point. Because actually this thing was open source. Interesting theme here today. Actually open source. This is not a situation like Tornado Cash where they published a system that, at least for a few years, they could modify, update, control, right? And then they ran a bunch of relayers using other software they'd written themselves off in a corner that was part of the process. So those guys had multiple touch points of control where whether or not they could seize all of your money or not, they were operating the system, and in the limit, that when it was an upgradable proxy, they could actually just take all of your money. These guys were not in that kind of situation at all. You could run Samourai on your own, and you could configure it to not use their servers. Yeah. And I think at that point, and again, I'm not relatively new to reading this thing, but their documentation is not bad, and the code is readable-ish. It seems like it would not have been possible for them to take your money at any point, and if you directed it in certain ways, you could even remove the fees. So were they a money transmitter? I mean, the definition of money transmitter requires a transmittal order, which is basically I tell you to pay somebody and I'll pay you back.
Yeah.
And that nothing like that happened here. They had no ability to get your funds because all the orders that were sent were effectively encrypted from the intermediary. They were not modifiable by the intermediary.
So on the charge of running an unlicensed money transmitter,
yeah, I mean,
the jury find the defendant not guilty.
That one really does seem questionable to me. I am not. It's possible that we misunderstand how this thing works.
Possibly.
It's also possible that there's information we don't have about parts of the system. It would not be the first time that the code that was running was not only the code that we knew about. Right?
Yeah.
That's happened before. I mean, the FTX debacle is probably the most famous example of a few lines of code nobody knew about changing the game from he ran a exploded crypto exchange to he was a thief, right? That changed everybody's perspective. So it's possible that there's like another little thing we know about or some bit of code that I didn't understand or read properly or whatever it is. But yeah, this one seems like almost certainly in trouble on the money laundering one, but maybe not so much on them.
And on the final charge of butchering the spelling of the word samurai,
I don't know where
we
that
find
came
the
from.
defendant guilty.
Super weird. I don't know why you'd spell samurai that way, but yes, this one is going to be very interesting. It is not the same as the Tornado Cash or Bitcoin Fog cases at all. I mean, Bitcoin Fog is inarguably a custodial money transmitting service.
Yeah.
It's just not clear who ran it or what the circumstances are around that. Tornado Cash, and we still think the Tornado Cash people are guilty of crimes, and the government has charged them with the wrong crimes or some of the wrong crimes. They ran a completely centralized, controlled, custodial, can steal all your money mixing service for a while, and then they changed it. And the government seems to have believed they ran that forever, and then for some other reason they're getting in trouble. So that one's got some issues. We have different issues with this in that they appear likely to be guilty of one of the things they were charged with, and it's really not clear that the way the system was designed could ever have committed the other crime. So it'll be interesting.
So be guilty, not guilty, guilty, and then on sentencing, we'll see.
Well, yeah, it's also not clear to me that the unlicensed money transmission is a meaningful charge relative to the conspiracy to commit money laundering.
I sentenced them to time served.
I mean, I suspect. I actually, did you look? I didn't look. I suspect that I mean, given that most of the time here, each transmission will count as a count.
Yeah.
The number of counts they can come up with of conspiracy to commit money laundering is going to be so high that the actual limit is going to be
like 164 years.
An absurd amount of time in prison. So it may not matter in the end. But it would be nice if the government didn't convict people of crimes that their systems could not have committed.
It would be nice if the government had precision in these things, but one can only hope.
Well, I mean, making the rules clearer in both directions is helpful. The problem is that you provide fodder to your critics when you do stuff that's not quite right, and we've seen this.
I've seen this many times where it's lacking precision. But being a make-believe attorney myself, I can tell you that most of us are afraid of these things, and that's why you often see this lack of precision in many of these things. You don't. Okay. We're afraid of numbers. We're afraid of alligators. We're afraid of code in general. So that's why you see these things crop up all the time. Well, okay, moving on. Finally, Renzo Restaked ETH. That's a mouthful, this John. You had to pick this one.
This is beautiful. Right. This is beautiful. So all right. So let's bring up a little bit of data. So before you bring up the data, so this is a liquid restaking protocol, whatever, and it had a substantial DPEG around the time they issued some terrible token allocations. We'll talk about that one in a second. And there were some issues with the way you will sign up to get the airdrops, the way the Binance launch pool works, that sort of stuff. So all the data we're going to look at here is just the biggest senders and receivers of this token, because what you can tell here, this is what's important. So I think this was run a little bit earlier, so there's a bit more than a million of these outstanding at the moment, but whatever, 1.2, whatever the outstanding quantities that have been minted. And then what you see up here at the top is a lot of the volume is in Balancer, 1inch, whatever. Lots of DeFi protocols are the big volume things here, and you see that on the other side as well. Right, so that's what's happening. So that's important for reasons that will become clear in a moment. Now, this thing is a restaking protocol, so you give it your ETH, and then it gives you some other token that you can, whatever, those ETH get staked, and you have something you can trade. Why the prevalence of DeFi, automated market maker trading protocols in the volume reports is so important is that you can't withdraw what's staked at the moment in this thing. So this thing launched, their token hasn't come out yet, just the protocol has launched, and you can only deposit. You can't withdraw. So if anything happens to scare people, the closest to a withdrawal they have is to sell. So this is why the price collapsed, because there's no way to withdraw the tokens. We've seen this with everything that only allows deposits and not withdrawals. As soon as there's a freak out, the price collapses. If you can withdraw and there's a freak out, the size collapses. You go in and you take your ETH back. I know that there's a whole process around ETH removal, and there's a queue for that, and you have to wait over time, and that's fine. So there may be a minor depeg, but 80% whatever drop in the price is larger than that. What's comical here is that the freak out that caused these withdrawal demand couldn't be met, led to selling. The freak out that caused that was the team coming out and announcing how their token is going to be allocated. So one thing they did, and this is just amusing. People can Google this. We should have had this up. But the pie chart for the token allocations didn't have the pie pieces to scale with their size, which is just beautiful. So there were like 2% and 14% sections of the pie that were shown as the same size. It added up to 100, but it just wasn't done right. So they corrected that eventually. And one of the issues is that there was initially no airdrop. So users of the protocol got nothing. And then they raised that a tiny bit. And at the time they raised the airdrop amount to some whatever non-zero amount, they also announced that the Binance launch pool process would run for a couple of days. I think it starts tomorrow, whatever, runs over the weekend. A couple of days before the token allocation stuff happens, whatever, and the rest of it. So what you're going to get here is a situation where all these people were using this thing to get the airdrop, to get their tokens, to get all this value, and they've now been told, A, you may get zero. Oh, sorry, we'll give you a tiny amount instead, and you're going to get front run by this other group of people. And there's a much more efficient way for you to get your hands on these tokens. So people decided they didn't want to use a token anymore, freaked out, couldn't withdraw, and just market sold them into AMMs. It's pretty interesting. You know, we've talked a lot about how many of these protocols, blockchains, projects, whatever, depend on a current account surplus, a flow of funds in to keep working. This is an issue with the way Athena works and whatever. Lots of stuff. This was Terra Luna's problem. So here, it's acute, because if you can only deposit and not withdraw, the moment the balance switches from in to out, the price effectively goes to zero, because you can't remove from the box. All you can do is sell. And who wants to buy if you can't ever redeem them? Right? So you're believing in this case that in a project that has launched but hasn't launched their token, so a very new project in which the project owners now have control over, what is it, like $3 billion of stoked tokens. You're relying on their goodwill to someday allow you to get your tokens back, with no real plan out there when they just released a pie chart that doesn't scale correctly. And, you know, you can see people losing confidence in that kind of process and saying 95% haircut is fine, I'm out.
I'm just wondering why they didn't just, I mean, any simple program would have given you a proportionate pie chart.
I will say it is pretty clear that pie chart was not produced in a spreadsheet or in any kind of data package. It looks like
drew it out.
Maybe somebody Google imaged pie chart and then pasted the numbers on top. I don't know. It would be difficult to make a not correctly scaled pie
I just
chart.
don't know where you would make it.
It would take extra work normally to do that wrong. So there you go. Pretty entertaining.
All right. On that note, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. We have
I should say, when Renzo Restaked, when the Renzo token launches, you can assure yourself that we'll be here to look at the allocation accuracy.
Of course. So. We'll have the all Bucharest special episode coming soon. We're waiting for some of the footage to come out from our recent trip down to Romania, so do look out for that. John's got a great podcast with the director of the ICI Bucharest. That's going to come out as well in the next couple of weeks once Orthodox Easter is over. So do look out for those pieces as well. Otherwise, thanks for all the likes, comments, subscribes. Keep them coming. Keep your comments coming, and we appreciate it when you do that. Have a great weekend. We will see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.